But you know what really changed me is when I was a resident at Hopkins. And I would be in the clinic, and I would see so many people coming in from the streets of Baltimore who were dependent upon the government, who were dependent upon other people, who really didn't see for themselves a part of the American dream. And I said, that's not the way God intended things to be in our society. And then people were always talking about Reagan and saying he was a racist and a horrible person. I started listening to what he was saying. I said, you know, this man actually makes sense. He's talking about things that are logical. And, you know, that's really when I kind of had a significant conversion experience. But this is not to say that I didn't recognize that there was racism and prejudice in our society. Of course there is, of course there was, but you know, my mother was quite an amazing person. She'd always say to me, if you walk into an auditorium full of racist, bigoted people, she said, you don't have a problem. They have a problem. Yeah. Because see, they're gonna all cringe and wonder if you're gonna sit next to them, whereas you can go sit anywhere you want. And you know, that's kind of the way I led my life, recognizing that of course there are going to be people out there who allow Satan to stimulate their minds, but you don't have to let that control you. You know, you get to decide what is going to control the kind of person you are. You know, I remember when I was in the 8th grade, you know, having come through my period already when I was just a horrendous student. I was the worst student imaginable. But, you know, my mother made me read books, made my brother read books, and really that kind of changed my life. And, you know, I went from the worst student to the best student. And I remember all the students used to laugh and call me names, coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. It was kind of fun to be able to do that. But I remember, you know, in the 8th grade at Wilson Junior High School, you know, I had really turned things around. I was a top student. And top student always got a special award at the end of the semester. And I knew I was going to be the one this year. I was the only black student. And you would take your report card around to each teacher and they would mark it. And I had all A's and I was down to the last class, which was band. And I was quite good in band, so I knew I was going to get an A in there. And the turkey teacher gave me a C. wanted to ruin my chances. But to his chagrin, band didn't count. So I still got the award. And you know, if any of you saw the movie Gifted Hands, you saw the situation where the teacher berated all the other students for letting a black student be number one in the class. You know, that's the kind of thing I grew up with. So have I seen racism and prejudice? Yes, but I also recognize that the reason the teacher said those things is because the teacher was ignorant, didn't really understand. They had very different ideals about what black people could achieve. And there are still people who feel that way today, and I understand that. But also, we need to recognize that not everything is racism. You know, there are a lot of people who bring up racism no matter what is going on. And, you know, I remember as a first-year medical student at the University of Michigan, I did terribly on my first set of comprehensive exams. And I was sent to see my counselor, and he looked at my record. He said, "You seem like a very smart young man." I bet there are a lot of things you could do outside of medicine.
Wow.
He said I should drop out of medical school. Said I wasn't cut out to be a doctor. And that I was just going to torment myself and everybody else. And why don't I just drop out now? They would help me to be able to get into some other area. And I was devastated because it was the only thing I'd ever wanted to do since I was 8 years old. I just wanted to be a doctor. Finally get there, and the person at the university chooses to help you get through, tells you to drop out. And I was devastated. And I did what I always do. I prayed. I asked God to give me the wisdom to know what to do. I started analyzing my academic record, and I realized that I did very well in classes traditionally where I did a lot of reading, and I did poorly in classes where I had to listen to a lot of boring lectures. Because I don't get anything out of boring lectures, zero. And there I was listening to 6 to 8 hours worth of boring lectures every day. So I made the executive decision to skip the boring lectures and to spend that time reading. And the rest of medical school was a snap after that. And, you know, I also learned that I was somebody who was very much engaged with visuals. I needed visuals to help me. So I started writing everything I was supposed to learn on little index cards with little pictures on them to remind me of what it was supposed to be. And I carried those around in my pocket all the time. And my second year in medical school, even my brother, who was an engineering student, knew all the bacteria and what they were sensitive to. Because I always had these cards. But, you know, the interesting thing is, years later, when I went back to Michigan as the commencement speaker, I was looking for that advisor. Because I was going to tell him he wasn't cut out to be an advisor. Because there are so many people who are just negative all the time. They're negative. And there's a lot of negativity in our society today also. And one of the things that I just want to mention briefly here today is how important it is for everybody to really study history. Yes. To understand the real history. You know, not the fake history, but the real history of what has happened in this country. This is a tremendous country that we live in. Doesn't mean that it has not made mistakes. We've made some horrendous mistakes in this country and paid horrendous prices for it too. But we shouldn't try to hide that history. The worst thing you can do is cover up bad stuff that happened. And that way, you know, you forget about it, your children forget about it, and the next thing you know, you're doing it again.
Yep.
You don't want to do that. That's the ostrich way of doing it. Stick your head in the sand and hope that there's nothing there. You pull your head out, it's still there. You know, we have to do better than that. Recognize when it comes to slavery, there are a lot of important lessons to be learned from slavery. You know, here was a situation, particularly in some of the states like Mississippi and Alabama, where in many cases there were more slaves than there were masters. And they were concerned about being able to keep the slaves under control. So what did they do? Divide them. You tell the ones in the house, you're better than the ones in the yard. You tell the ones in the yard, you're better than the ones in the field. And you keep that tension going, and then there's no way that they're going to accumulate the power that they need in order to control their own destiny. And then after slavery ended, you tell the light-skinned ones, you're better than the medium-skinned ones. The medium-skinned ones are better than the dark-skinned ones.
Talk about it.
And on it goes. Today, they try to divide conservatives and liberals.
Yep.
They want to make sure that there's no getting together between those groups. Why is that so important? Economic power. Do you realize that in the African American community in this country, there is over $1 trillion in assets? There are less than 10 countries in the world that have $1 trillion GDP, just to put that in perspective for you. And you look at some of the successful communities in our country, Jewish, Korean, what do? They turn that dollar over in their community a couple of times before they send it out. That's how they accumulate wealth. If black people learn how to do that, you want to talk about some wealth. We don't talk about black power, we talk about green power.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And that is something we just have to start thinking about. Don't allow ourselves to be divided. Divide and conquer. It's the strategy that has existed since there were people on earth. Yes. And it's still going on today. It's going on a larger scale in our society at large. This nation is far too strong to be brought down from the outside. But it can clearly be destroyed from the inside.
Yeah.
And how do you destroy it from the inside? You see it going on every day. You know, people stirring up strife. You can take the most radical left-wing person and the most radical right-wing person, and they're going to agree on 90% of stuff. But see, the haters, they take that 10% and they stir it, and they magnify it, and they try to get you to think that that's the only thing that's important. And hence we have all the hatred that's going on in our society today. And if you look at history, it will destroy us if we are not smart enough as a nation to actually see what's going on. One of the things that I try to tell most of the young press people that I see, that I run into, is I say, you're part of a noble profession. The only business that's protected by the United States Constitution is the press. The reason for that is because the press is supposed to disseminate information to the people so that the people can wisely decide on what their will is, and then the country can be run on the will of the people. When the press decides that they're going to act differently and that they have an agenda and that they're going to try to manipulate people and be on one side or the other, then we have a problem. And we need to encourage all the press people we know to reach for that level of integrity that was intended. And I'd like to see some of you young people go into journalism and be fair and be just. Become a mogul. You know, Armstrong Williams, look at all the TV stations he owns. I want you all, some of you, to be even bigger than that. And be able to have networks that emphasize fairness and justice. It is possible to do. You know, it's in our pledge, liberty and justice for all. But are they just meaningless words? Or is it something that we're actually willing to advocate for? Something that we're actually willing to fight for? We have the ability to do that. And then when it comes to fairness, a lot of times people want it to be only fair for them. They don't care about other people. Now, one of the things that's been argued about for decades now is the whole concept of, do we take somebody's skin color and then we use that to give them a special advantage? Well, what I advocate is something I call compassionate action. And what that means is we don't look at a person's skin color, we look at a person's circumstances. Wow. What are the circumstances from which? We have always been a compassionate society. And, if somebody came from, the worst environment and, they've achieved at an extraordinary level, and then there's somebody else who came from the best of circumstances and they've achieved at an extraordinary level, yeah, I say give the one who came the furthest a little bit of advantage, absolutely. And I don't think that's unfair. And it really doesn't matter what color they are. If it happens to be a little kid from Appalachia whose father got killed in the coal mines when he was 5, who's been working his tail off all the time, and he's managed to get a 3.97 grade point average and a 95 percentiles on his standardized testing. And he's up against my son, who grew up in complete luxury and had every advantage and everything, and also has that. I give the Appalachian kid the advantage in that situation. Because in that kind of situation, the group that needs it is the group that benefits. And that group may change over the course of time. So that's what I call fairness. When we look at people's circumstances, because people are people. And what makes you who you are? When I would go into the operating room and take off that skull and open the dura and look at that brain, I would realize that that is the thing that makes you who you are.
That's right.
It's not your hair or your nose or your complexion. It has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with that incredible brain that God endowed each one of us with. And that's what we really need to be thinking about at this point. In order to do that, in order to stand out, it requires courage. You remember in high school how everybody wanted to get the high fives and the low fives and the pats on the back and be cool and walking around and doing your little strut. Nobody wanted to be the odd man out. That's terrible. Same thing going on when you get older. Everybody wants to be loved and cherished. That's why the whole concept of political correctness has become so powerful. Nobody wants to go against the grain. It requires courage to go against the grain. And, in my medical career, I had a fair amount of controversy. Why? Because I wasn't satisfied. And you would want to look at the big picture. I remember there was one case, this woman was pregnant and with twins. And one of them had hydrocephalus. And it was developing very rapidly and expanding that baby's head to the point that she was going to go into premature labor and lose both babies. Mm. And no one would do anything about it. And there had been an article in the New England Journal of Medicine saying intrauterine surgery is not something that we can do at this stage. And yet, I looked at that situation, I said, not only is the abnormal baby going to die, but the normal baby is going to die if we don't do something. And I was aware of some research that a neurosurgeon was doing in the Philadelphia area with intrauterine surgery on sheep. And I called him up and I said, this is the situation. We figure out a way that we can do this in humans. And there were a lot of ethical things, and the hospital said, we can't do it. So I found another hospital that said they could. And we actually did the surgery at the other hospital. And it was fabulous watching right on the screen as a baby's head just shrunk right down. And several weeks later, the delivery was carried out. And there was a lot of criticism. They were saying, this is unethical, what was done, this man's being a hot dog and so forth. But then,
Wow.
Then it became clear that not only was the normal baby doing okay, but the other baby was doing okay too.
Yeah. Lifesaver.
So then they all said, well, I would have done that too. But, that's the way it works. So you really can't be concerned about what people are going to be thinking. You can't walk around with your finger in the air all the time, trying to figure out what are they thinking, what should I do? Same thing with achondroplasty, the most common form of dwarfism. 7% of achondroplastic babies used to die, usually in their sleep. It was because of the abnormal bony formation at the base of the skull, compressing the brainstem. And when people would go in and try to do something about it, it was so tight that they frequently exacerbated the situation and the baby would die or be crippled. And I remember being in Rome at the first international conference on human achondroplasia, and all the world geneticists and people were talking about achondroplasia. And then it came my turn to talk, and I talked about a new technique we've developed to decompress this area safely. And they were just outraged. They said, you surgeons are the ones who kill these people because you think you can do everything. If you leave them alone, only 7% of them will die. And they were just on and on. And I came back to Hopkins. I continued doing the operation. People were complaining to the dean and to the president of the hospital. Carson's a wild man. You can't let him do this. They reported me to the Maryland Medical Association, the AMA.
Wow.
Stop this man. But, by that time, I had done enough cases, we could reveal the data, and it showed that none of the patients had died. Wow. And they were all and, now that procedure is a standard procedure, and achondroplasts don't die at a rate any greater than anybody else. But, the point being that sometimes you have to risk being unpopular. Sometimes you have to risk people saying bad things about you and calling you names. But to me that's not important. To me what's important is to be called by a favorable name by God.
Yeah.
Amen.
That's the person that I look to for approval. I don't care about I would love it if everybody loved you, but that just can't be your goal. Your goal has to be to do what is right. And if you learn to do it together, then you really have synergy. I remember there was one case of conjoined twins, and I said, this is Johns Hopkins. We have the best neurosurgery department in the world. Why should I do all of this work? So I said, we got some of the best neurosurgeons in the world here. We got skull-based surgeons and vascular neurosurgeons and tissue surgeons. And so we put together, a plan where we would bring each set of people in when we got to the part of the operation where they would be the expert. We were 10 hours ahead of schedule. Wow. This is what happens when it doesn't matter who gets the credit, but you understand what you're trying to do. But the key thing for us is not to let other people dictate who we are. Don't let the haters dictate to you who you are. And trust in God. Sometimes it's hard to understand God. I remember there was a case in South Africa, conjoined twins, and we had to emergently separate them because, they were deteriorating rapidly. They didn't know why they were deteriorating. When we got in, we discovered that we were putting them on cardiac bypass, the heart of one of them wasn't functioning. So the other one was doing all the heart work. So as they grew, they were going to congestive failure because he couldn't do all the work. That's why they were deteriorating. And we discovered that on the operating room table. Well, we got them separated. Obviously, the one with no heart function died. But the other one was doing pretty well. We're kind of encouraged about that. And then that one started having seizures and started having all kind of problems, and within a couple of days died. Autopsy revealed that that one didn't have any kidneys. The other one had the kidneys. One had the kidneys and one had the heart. And I'll tell you, riding back to the United States, I was more depressed than I think I've ever been. I was saying, Lord, why'd you get me into this? You know, anybody can fail. I don't need to be doing that. But, you know, a couple of years later, there was another case from Zambia, and we were going to do it in South Africa. The team was there, all the equipment was there. They were joined at the top of the head, type 2 vertical craniopicus. And never before had that kind of separated successfully. And, you know, I prayed about it and said, yeah, we should try to do this. It was very, very, very complex. But the bottom line is, after 28 hours of surgery, we were complete, and one of the twins popped his eyes open. And by the time we got to the ICU, the other one popped his eyes open, and within 2 days, they were extubated. Within 3 days, they were eating. Within 2 weeks, they were crawling. And today, they're perfectly normal. You know? But the real success you had to be there to witness was the reaction of the people. I mean, the people were literally dancing in the streets. This was done in their country, in their hospital. Their level of self-esteem was through the roof. And you know, isn't that what real success is about? Using the talent that God has given you to elevate others. Thank you.
Dr. Ben Carson, ladies and gentlemen. All right, guys, that was Ben Carson. I'm gonna pause it right here. I'm not sure what's coming up next, but I have it in my program. I'll probably come back on soon. Matter of fact, we got Brandon Tatum right here. Hold on, y'all, one second.
Let's see. Ben Carson.
Give Ben Carson another round of applause. Real quick, so we can stay on schedule, we have stupid things. Please be mindful of the excessive talking when the speakers are talking. Make sure you just keep it down. Try to do your best to stay seated when we have presentations. Walking in and out is disrespectful, okay? We were good?
Yes, sir.
All right. So next up, we're going to change speeds a little bit. We had two great dynamic speakers, and now it's time for a level of education, the educational portion, which means that it's less intense. But I think this gentleman is going to deliver really well from the Leadership Institute. Help me welcome Gabriel Nadales.
All right, so I'm gonna watch him, but I'll come back a little bit later to preserve my battery. So you guys hang in there. Peace out.
Cool. There it is. Good morning, guys. So my name is